Hello citizens of the internet, my name's Jimmy, and in life, two things are certain, death and taxes. But what happens when we die? Well, what if sword-wielding crows came and reaped our souls? That's the premise of Death's Door, a Souls-like game where you work for the Reaping Commission that collects souls from people that just don't want to die. Death's Door is a game developed by Acid Nerve, and it starts out with you getting off a bus at your first day working for the Reaping Commission, where you get assigned your first job as a Reaper. Now, this is where the rest of the video pretty much just becomes all spoilers, so bear that in mind. Okay, you have been warned. So, anyway, Chandler the handler tells you that he's got a soul for you to reap, but it's not any old soul. Oh no, not on your first day. No, it's a giant soul. He then opens the door to the world where the giant is and explains how, while the door's open, you'll be mortal and will also age. Now, the whole being mortal and aging thing doesn't really affect the game too much, it just sets up the plot more than anything. But I assume that the reason you're mortal is because you're in the real world, but you can also die in the office. But anyway, that's just a bit of a nitpick, really. You go through the door that Randall opens up for you, and the game gives you a vague rundown of what every button does. And that's where you get to the first boss, which I thought looked pretty awesome. In fact, all the bosses are unique and well designed in this game, but that's something we'll get to in a minute. Once you finally beat it, a door opens up behind you and you fucking die. Okay, you don't die, but you get knocked out and end up losing the giant soul. You end up fighting another giant boss who ends up being the guardian of Death's Door, and that's where you meet the Grey Crow, who was the douche that came through the crack and knocked you out. He explains how he needs a soul because he was a Reaper too, that also lost a soul, which, as I said before, is no bueno because that means his door's still open and he is aging. And now so are you, because he tried to use the soul that he was meant to reap to break into Death's Door to find the one he had lost. He basically blackmails you and tells you that you need to find 3 more big juicy souls, and that's pretty much the plot of the game. Beat the 3 bosses and get your souls back. So let's, talk about the bosses now. But before we fully get into each individual boss, I just want to say that all the bosses in this game are absolutely excellent for the most part. They felt fair, and that when I died it was entirely my fault for making a mistake and not because of some BS attack that they pulled out of nowhere. So the first boss you have to defeat is the Urn Witch, a witch who turns everyone's heads into urns because apparently that hides you from death. Yeah, sure, why not? You meet Pothead, one of the side characters. And for the most part, the side characters are just there for exposition, but again, that's something we'll talk about later. So you slash away through the Urn Witch's mansion and her underground lab, and throughout, you learn the reason she is working on immortality is because her husband passed away, and that Pothead is actually her grandson who she failed to make immortal because she made an oopsie doodle, and she gave him a pot for a head instead of an urn. You also find out that she was commissioned by the Commission to work on creating immortality, which is odd, right, considering it's their job to reap souls, right? She also calls you a little shit before the fight, which I found kind of funny. The fight with her was a lot of fun, to be fair. I died a good few times, but as I said, that was mostly my fault. Her attacks consisted of a long-range bombs and the occasional spin attack which sent her flying across the map. Now, before I carry on, I think it's important I talk about the main character's combat. It's fairly basic but in a good way. See, you have a basic attack and a heavy attack, and a bow to start off with. As you go through the game, you unlock new projectiles and can also find new melee weapons. My biggest gripe with the combat is how you only have 4 lives and can't heal during combat. I get it's meant for difficulty's sake and they can be upgraded by finding shrines, but that was a lot of effort and a lot of time, and I found it easier, to unalive myself if I took a hit too early on in the boss battle. Which, in all honesty, overall probably did mean that I ended up wasting more time if I'd found the shrines, but you know what, I was too stubborn to go and look for them. The only actual way to heal yourself in the game was with these little plants that you could actually plant yourself in specific areas, but overall it was a fun combat system, other than, that little complaint. So, once you beat the Urn Witch, the next door you go through messes up and sends you to the Lord of Doors room, who basically is like the big boss of the Commission who rules over all the doors. Throughout the game, you learn a lot about the Lords of Doors and how they are granted longer life by the Grim Reaper, in exchange for streamlining the reaping process. How nice is that? The Lord of Doors are basically just managers at the Amazon fulfillment centers. They're not the biggest boss, but you know, still kind of up there. The Lord of Doors sends you back to the commission, and then it's on your way to fight the Frog King. You go through a jungle/swamp and help out the forest natives, who were pretty pissed off at the Frog King because in his attempt to make the forest more modern, he kind of ended up ruining it for the natives. And this part of the game is probably one of the parts that frustrated me most in terms of combat. See, with all the 3 main bosses, you have to release souls of crows that died when their doors got destroyed by the commission. But before you could release them, you have to beat waves of enemies. There was one wave during all of that almost sent me insane because it felt so unfair. See, usually with the enemies, you could pick up their patterns really easily, but with these 3 giant guys, it was really different because you'd either get hammered by them or bombed. Not only that, you were surrounded by water, which can damage you too, which made dodging a lot tougher. Maybe it was just me being bad, but I had to take a break at the risk of going insane. The Frog King himself was actually a fairly fun fight, and his pre-fight title card, or whatever you want to call it, made me laugh. But he was the one I probably cared about the least. Although, again, it did feel completely fair and balanced. Also, can I just point out, I'm pretty sure it's based on the Frog Fall from the Marvel comics, which I thought was pretty funny. This leaves us with the final of the 3 bosses, and this boss kind of ruined the trend of the bosses being balanced. Before you fight her, you go through my favourite areas in the game, just in terms of how good they look, and you meet a dude who tells you about his wife Betty, who was eaten by the monster. A horrible feral beast who destroys anything in its path. But it turns out Betty is actually the Yeti, which I only just realised was probably named that on purpose. She had to be probably one of the most frustrating bosses I've ever played against in any game. Again, this was most likely just me being bad at the game, but her movements and attacks were just so over the place and hard to avoid that I had to take several breaks and many attempts to beat her, which, I mean, honestly may not have been the worst thing, considering that meant I got to listen to the excellent song that plays during her fight. Which leads me to another tangent. The music. It's excellent. Every song did a great job at capturing the feeling of the area it was playing in, and along with the beautiful scenery, made for a really relaxing world despite everything trying to kill me. And this isn't a thing that's uncommon for Acid No. Their previous game, Titan Souls, also had an incredible soundtrack. It's one of the things they really do well. Anyway, back to the meat of the game. Once Betty finally gets hoofed, it's back to the Grey Crow. You use the souls you collect to break through Death's door, where you meet Death himself, who I think is my favourite depiction of Death because he's just an edgy teenager. He carries on to explain the importance of death and how souls go past their best before they go bad. Reaping was too depressing for him though, so when the original Lord of Doors offered to create him a door that would automate the process, he was more than happy to oblige in return for extending the Lord's lives. But the current Lord wanted to live forever and ended up locking Death's door, making it so that Death couldn't get out and take the Lord's soul. Upon learning that immortality is impossible, the Grey Crow goes insane and tries to kill you, which leads to the best boss battle I've played in a long time. Once again, the music was perfect and the way the Grey Crow moved, it was so cool. Beating him was pretty tough, but once again, felt pretty fair. His attacks were varied and honestly, I thought he'd be the final boss until you beat him and Death tells you that finally, it's time to stop the Lord of Doors. And let me tell you, the Lord of Doors really didn't want to give up his soul without a fight. And his fight was pretty interesting. It starts with you fighting in his office, which leads to you chasing him through the rest of the commission as you avoid door ball things that he has control over. When you eventually catch up to him, you end up fighting again, this time with him using powers that the earlier bosses used against you. Once you make it through another section of the commission, there's a final standoff in the main office of the commission, which was a brilliant final fight that was fitting with the final boss. He uses again all of the abilities that have been used against you so far, and it's really fun. Really difficult, but really fun. Death's Door had some of the most enjoyable combat I've experienced in a while, and it was a lot of fun to play. My final tangent is about what really rounded this game up and made it feel awesome to me. That is the world and the characters in general. The world was absolutely beautiful with an incredible atmosphere. And the characters were funny and charming. The ones that followed you on your journey really helped you feel like the world was lived in, fun and vibrant. I think my favourite character had to be Jefferson, who at first I thought was a guy with a pet squid, but then when you read his dialogue you realise he's actually the squid using Jefferson's body to pretend like he's a human, which when I realised I couldn't help but smile. Especially when he's telling you secrets and his body just flops on the table. The game also gives you a lot of incentive to explore it, by leaving things to discover all over. From new weapons to mini bosses you can beat to upgrade certain abilities like your bow and bombs. There's even little collectibles that you can find, which at first I thought was pointless until I realised that they will just pile up at your desk at a commission, which you can see whenever you start up the game, which I thought was just a really cute little touch. Obviously the game tackles the idea of dying a lot throughout, which I'm sure most of us have thought of from time to time, but it's never so dark or grim that it made me feel existential. Not even Death's edgy tale of, well, death managed to. Overall, this was the most fun I've had from a Souls-like slasher game in a long time, with an excellent world, fun characters, and for me, for the most part, enjoyable combat. It took me 10 hours to complete the game to around 75%, meaning you could easily get 15 to 20 hours of enjoyment out of it, which for €20 I'd say is worth it. Anyway, if you made it this far, thank you for sticking around. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and feel free to subscribe. Thank you all for watching, and I love you.